Hi, loves! Missed you guys! I'm back with another story today. Before we jump in, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into it. So my boyfriend's name is Ray, and we've been together a little over 2 years. We live together in a one-bedroom apartment in Bismarck, North Dakota. We're here because Ray got a remote position with a company based out of Minneapolis, and I'd been working here since I finished school, and neither of us had a reason to move yet. Our apartment is in this older complex off of State Street, the kind where the hallways smell like whatever everyone's cooking and you can hear your upstairs neighbor's TV through the ceiling. Charming. I need to back up and explain how we even got to the Reddit post situation because that's not the beginning. It's just where everything finally blew up in a way I couldn't keep pretending was normal. Ray and I met through my friend Zara. Zara was dating a guy on this recreational hockey league, and they were doing some charity bar thing downtown in January, which if you know Bismarck in January, you know that's basically asking people to die for a good cause. I almost didn't go because my car was being a nightmare in the cold. But Zara basically wouldn't stop texting me about it, so I went, and Ray was in the group, and he was funny and easy to talk to, and we ended up at this table in the back of Borrowed Bucks Roadhouse talking until they kicked everyone out. First year was good, and I'm saying that up front because I'm not going to rewrite history to make myself look smarter. It was genuinely good. Ray was thoughtful. We'd do stuff on the weekends even when there's literally nothing to do in Bismarck in the winter, which is most of the year. He got along with my family, which was huge because my dad is not an easy sell. My parents live about 15 minutes south of the city. In this house my dad has been adding on to for years. Every room is slightly different because he did it himself over time. My dad liked Ray because Ray could keep up with him talking about anything. The grain market, deer season, whatever the city council was messing up that week. My mom liked him because he had good manners and always brought something when he came over. My brother Andy, who's 22 and still living at home, liked Ray because Ray let him use his gaming accounts and would actually play online with him, which Andy thought was the coolest thing. Things started changing around the 1-year mark, and I need to be specific because looking back, each individual thing seemed like nothing but together they were something. It started with comments about my friends, small stuff. Zara would text about getting food at this po place we both love near the mall, and I'd mention it to Ray and he'd make some remark about how Zara never has money and I always end up paying, which happened one time because she forgot her card. But Ray turned it into this recurring thing he'd bring up like Zara was some freeloader draining my bank account. Or my friend Lily from my job would invite me over, and Ray would get this expression and then say something about how Lily only hits me up when she wants someone to listen to her complain. Not true at all, but try arguing with someone about their interpretation of your friend's intentions. You can't win that. Then it moved to money. We split rent and utilities, and our personal spending was supposed to be our own, but he developed opinions about everything I purchased. I'd come back from Target, and he'd comment about me being there again like I was addicted to Target. I bought new winter boots in October because newsflash, North Dakota requires boots that actually work, and he made a whole thing about how I had boots already. The boots I already had were 3 winters old with cracked soles that let water in. But okay, Ray, let me just get frostbite to save $40. Then came the family comments. I'm close with my family. My mom and I talk almost every day, and I go over for dinner at least once a week, sometimes more. Ray started saying stuff about how much time I spent there. He'd say it must be nice having a second home to run to whenever real life gets hard. He said it like a joke, but it didn't feel like a joke. And every time I told him to cut it out, he'd act all confused and say I was too sensitive and couldn't handle any teasing. I want to be extremely clear. I am not someone who sits there silently while people take shots at me. Every single time Ray said something that bothered me, I told him directly. I said, stop making comments about Zara. I said my spending is not your business. I said my family is not negotiable. And every single time this thing would happen where by the end of the conversation, I was the one feeling bad. He'd bring up something unrelated from weeks ago, or he'd start talking about something I did that hurt him, and suddenly we're not even discussing his comment anymore. We're arguing about the time I was 20 minutes late to meet him somewhere in September. It was like trying to nail water to a wall. Okay, so the Reddit post. About 6 weeks before everything exploded, I was lying in bed at like 1 a.m. unable to sleep. Ray was out cold next to me, snoring, totally unbothered. And I was running through everything in my head. All the little moments from the past year. All the times I tried to bring stuff up and somehow ended up being the one who apologized. I grabbed my phone and found a relationship advice sub and just started typing on a throwaway. I kept it anonymous. No real names, no location, no identifying details. I described the pattern. Friend comments, money policing, family digs, the conversational misdirection every time I tried to address it. Posted it around 2 a.m. and passed out. Within 2 days, it had hundreds of comments. Most people were pointing out that this was textbook isolation behavior. Someone asked me to count how many friends I'd stopped seeing as often since dating him, and I actually sat there and counted, and it was 3. 3 friends I saw less regularly because it wasn't worth the comments and the weird energy from Ray afterward. Reading that was like having cold water thrown on me. I'd been so focused on each individual incident that I never stepped back and looked at the overall picture. I didn't do anything dramatic after reading the comments. I just started paying attention differently. I noticed how Ray would check my phone location. I noticed how he'd ask what my mom and I talked about with this specific tone, not curious, more like auditing. I noticed he'd get weird if I didn't respond to a text within 15 or 20 minutes, even if I was literally at the grocery store. I was building a mental picture and I didn't like what it looked like. Then about 3 weeks ago, Wednesday night, I was in the kitchen making pasta. Ray was in the living room on some work call. My phone was on the counter and I'd been looking at Reddit earlier, but I thought I'd closed it. When I picked up the phone to check a text from my mom, the Reddit app was still open, and it was on my throwaway account, the post sitting right there on screen. I switched to my messages and didn't think about it, because why would I? He was on a call in the other room. Ray finished his call maybe half an hour later, came into the kitchen, totally normal, grabbed a plate, sat on the couch. We were talking about nothing, his work, some road construction on Divide Avenue that's been making his gym commute annoying. Then he picked up my phone from the coffee table. He does this constantly, just grabs my phone to look up random stuff even though his is right there. I normally don't care, but this time I immediately thought about the Reddit app. I reached for it and said I needed to text someone. He didn't hand it over. He was looking at the screen and scrolling. I said, "Ray, give me my phone." He kept scrolling. I said it again. And he just goes, "Is this about me?" I could have lied. I could have said 100 things. But I was exhausted from a year of managing his feelings and monitoring my own reactions and performing this version of our relationship that kept him comfortable. So I said, "Yes, it's about you." What followed was the worst hour of my life in that apartment. He started pacing. He was reading pieces of my post out loud, but not accurately. He was pulling sentences out and twisting them. I'd written about feeling like I was walking on eggshells, and he was screaming that he was the one walking on eggshells because apparently I was so sensitive he couldn't breathe without me getting offended. He kept going to the comments section and reading the ones where people called him abusive, and he'd practically shoved the phone at me going, "Do you think this? Is this what you think I am?" I tried to explain. I told him the reason I posted was because every time I tried to have a real conversation with him about these things, it went nowhere. I said I needed an outside perspective because I was starting to question my own judgment. He was not hearing a single word. He kept repeating that I went to strangers instead of coming to him like an adult. I said, "I did come to you, Ray. Multiple times. You just turn it around every single time until I'm the one apologizing." He said that was because the problems I was raising weren't real problems. They were me looking for reasons to be unhappy. Then his whole energy shifted. He got very calm. He said I had humiliated him. He said I put their private life on the internet for thousands of people to read and judge. He said this was the most disrespectful thing anyone had ever done to him in his life. Then he walked into the kitchen with my phone, did something on it for about a minute, came back and held up the screen showing the factory reset confirmation. Said there, "Your little diary is gone." And he had this expression like he'd just accomplished something important. I was standing there, not because I was some helpless deer, but because I was calculating. I was trying to figure out which of the 17 things I wanted to say needed to come first. I told him he just destroyed everything on my phone. Every photo, every message, every contact, 2 years of my life on that device. He said it's a phone and I could set it back up in 20 minutes. I told him that was not the point. He said the point was that I don't air private business to the internet. That's when he said it. He told me if I ever posted about him again, he would make sure everyone saw a side of me I don't want them to see. I asked what that meant. He got this look, smug, satisfied, like he'd been saving this. He told me to think about it. Then he walked into the living room, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV, like the conversation was over, like he'd won. I stood in the kitchen processing, not the sad kind of processing, the kind where you're running through your options and none of them are calm. I grabbed my keys and my purse and I drove to my parents' house. It was almost 11 at night. My dad was asleep because he's up before 5 every morning. My mom was in the kitchen with the TV on, some rerun she watches every night. She saw my face when I came through the door and immediately started asking questions. I told her Ray and I had a huge fight and I needed to stay over. She didn't push. She set up the couch in the living room for me because Andy's got his stuff everywhere in the spare room, and she brought me a blanket and a glass of water and said we'd talk tomorrow. Except tomorrow, I still didn't tell her everything. I told her about the fight, about the phone reset. I did not mention the threat, because I knew what would happen. My dad would find out. And my dad is not the kind of man who hears that someone threatened his daughter and takes a deep breath and suggests a family meeting. He's the kind of man who drives to the apartment. And I was not ready for that chain of events yet because I needed to think. My mom was already heated about the phone. She kept asking questions, practical ones. Why would he reset it? What was he trying to erase? And she made a point I hadn't even considered yet. By wiping my phone, he didn't just delete the Reddit post. He erased our entire text message history. Every conversation where I'd tried to address problems and he'd shut me down or flipped it around on me. None of that existed anymore. I hadn't screenshotted anything because I wasn't preparing for some kind of case, I was just living. I went back to the apartment the next day after I knew Ray would be at the gym. I needed clothes and some things. While I was packing a bag, I noticed my laptop was sitting open on the kitchen table. I always close my laptop. It's a habit from college. I always shut it when I walk away. I could see from the search history that someone had been going through my recent conversations. End threads with Zara, messages to my mom. He'd been looking through my laptop to see what else I'd said about him. This person believes he has the right to control what I say, who I say it to, and to punish me if I step outside what he's okay with. The friend comments, the money opinions, the family digs, all of it was the same thing. And the phone reset and laptop search were the same thing escalated. And the threat was the next level up. But I couldn't just pack everything and vanish because my name is on the lease. My stuff is in that apartment. And the threat was still hanging over me because I didn't know exactly what he meant. I don't have some secret. I've never cheated, never done anything shady. The only thing I could think of was intimate photos from early in our relationship when we used to send each other stuff. And knowing those might be on his phone or his cloud or his 3 separate computer monitors in that office made me feel something I can't even put into words. I called Zara because I needed to tell somebody everything. She picked up immediately and I laid it all out. And Zara's first question was about photos. She asked directly if I'd sent him anything I wouldn't want other people seeing. I said yes, from early on. She got serious fast. She said that distributing intimate images without consent is a crime. She said I needed to think about this as a legal situation and not just a relationship one. But here's the thing about Ray that's hard to explain to people who haven't dealt with someone like him. His threat might mean photos. It might also mean he tells everyone some made-up version of who I am. Ray has this talent for constructing a completely alternate reality and delivering it in this calm, reasonable voice that makes everyone believe him. He could tell my friends, my family, my coworkers anything and make it sound credible. That possibility honestly scared me just as much. I stayed at my parents' for 3 days. Ray started texting me after I set my phone back up, which, by the way, I lost every photo and every text from the past 2 years because my backup was ancient, so that was fun. His texts weren't, "Are you okay?" or "I'm sorry." They were, "When are you coming home?" Like I'd gone to the store and was taking too long. I told him I needed space. He sent 8 messages over the next 2 hours about how I was being dramatic and how real couples don't run away from problems. I didn't answer any of them. Then my mom's landline rang. Ray was calling the house. My mom answered and he asked for me. She said I didn't want to talk right now and he should give me time. He hung up. A few minutes later, my dad's cell rang. Ray calling again. My dad picked up and Ray started in about how there was a misunderstanding and he just needed 5 minutes to talk to me. My dad told him to give me space and that calling every number in the house was making things worse. Ray started getting loud on the phone, saying my parents were keeping me from him and he had a right to speak to his girlfriend. My dad hung up. Ray called back. Dad didn't answer, but he put the phone down and looked at me across the kitchen and said, "Okay, what happened between you two?" Not a question. A statement that required a full answer immediately. So I sat down at the table with my mom and dad and Andy, who was home that day, and I told them almost everything. I still did not tell them about the threat. I know. But the threat was a different category, and if my dad heard that Ray was holding something over my head, implied or not, my dad would be in his truck and at that apartment within minutes, and I genuinely did not know what would happen after that. I needed a plan, not a reaction. My dad was already furious about what I did tell him. He kept getting up from the table and sitting back down. He asked me 3 separate times if Ray had ever put his hands on me. I said no. My mom was asking whether my name was first on the lease. Had I changed my passwords yet? Did I have any important documents at the apartment? Andy was quiet during the conversation, but later he came and found me on the couch and told me something that stuck. He said every time he'd been over at the apartment, Ray would angle his phone screen away or leave the room to take texts. Andy said he never mentioned it because it wasn't his business. But with everything else now, it seemed like maybe it was something. So that was my situation. Staying at my parents', Ray alternating between blowing up my phone and going completely silent for hours, a lease with my name on it, intimate photos potentially in the possession of someone who just directly threatened to weaponize them, and a family who only knew 70% of the story. And then 4 days after the big fight, something happened that I was absolutely not prepared for, and it changed the entire situation. But this is already ridiculously long, and I still need to figure out how to even explain the next part. I'll update when I can. The way this man heard his girlfriend say I'm unhappy, and his first thought wasn't, "Oh no," it was, "Who did you tell?" Like, dude, Your girl is struggling and your biggest concern is your reputation. Not how she's feeling, not what you did wrong, not how to fix it. Just who else knows? That energy right there tells you everything you need to know. He's not mad that she's hurting, he's mad that other people found out he's the reason why, and those are two very different things. And can we talk about how men like this always have the most to say about your spending, your friends, your family? But the second you have something to say about them, suddenly you're dramatic and sensitive and can't take a joke. Like the math is not mathing here, dude. You can have an opinion about her buying boots, but she can't have an opinion about you being awful. You can audit every dollar she spends at Target, but she can't even write her feelings down without you losing your mind. Make it make sense. The rules only go one direction with these men, and that direction is whatever keeps them comfortable and keeps you quiet. Update. Okay, so first of all, the amount of people who read my original post and took the time to comment, I genuinely did not expect that. Some of you were asking questions that made me think about things from angles I hadn't considered, and some of you just said you were rooting for me, and honestly, that mattered more than you'd think when you're sleeping on your parents' couch at 26. So I left off at 4 days after the fight. Something happened that changed the situation. Here's what went down. I'd been at my parents' house, and Ray had gone through a full cycle of texting. First, it was the "when are you coming home" stuff. Then a day of nothing. Then he shifted to these longer messages about how we needed to talk like adults, and how running to my parents' house every time we had a disagreement was exactly the kind of thing that was going to ruin our relationship. He actually used the word ruin like he wasn't the one who factory reset my phone and threatened me. Day 4. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table eating cereal and scrolling through my phone, which was still basically empty because setting it back up from a 2-year-old backup meant I was missing basically everything recent. My mom was at the sink doing dishes, and my dad had already left for work. Andy was still asleep because Andy doesn't surface before noon if he doesn't have to be anywhere. Ray texted me asking if I could come by the apartment that afternoon because he wanted to talk in person, and he said he had something to tell me. Not an apology. Not "I miss you." He said there's something you should know, and I'd rather say it face to face. Now look, I know what you're thinking. Don't go, it's a trap. He's going to manipulate you. And yeah, I thought about that. But here's the thing. I still had stuff at the apartment that I needed. Important stuff. And also, and I know this is going to sound naive, but I genuinely wanted to hear what he had to say. Not because I was hoping for an apology, but because the threat he made was still sitting in my brain like a splinter. If he was going to tell me what he meant by that, I wanted to hear it. I told my mom I was going to the apartment to get some things. She asked if Ray would be there. I said probably. She gave me a look that could peel paint and told me to call her if I needed anything, and to keep my phone in my pocket. I told her I would. I drove over around 2 p.m. The parking lot of our complex was mostly empty because most people in our building work day shifts. I sat in my car for a solid 5 minutes just staring at the building. Not because I was scared, but because I was running through scenarios. What was he going to say? What was I going to say back? What was my line? The thing he could say that would make me stop listening and leave. I went up and let myself in. Ray was sitting on the couch with the TV off, which was immediately weird because that TV has not been off during waking hours in 2 years. He looked like he'd been sitting there waiting, not like he'd just sat down. The apartment was clean, which was also weird because Ray is not a cleaner. I'm the one who keeps the apartment from looking like a frat house, and I'd been gone for 4 days. But everything was wiped down, dishes done, floor vacuumed. I could see the lines from the vacuum on the carpet. I didn't sit down. I went straight to the bedroom closet and started pulling my documents folder and some clothes I needed. He followed me and stood in the doorway and started talking. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking since I left. He said he understood why I was upset about the phone, and he shouldn't have done that. He said the fight got out of hand and he reacted badly. And then he said the thing he wanted to tell me in person. He said he'd read my entire Reddit post again before he reset the phone. Not just the parts he'd read out loud during the fight, all of it, and all the comments. And he said reading what hundreds of strangers said about him made him actually look at his own behavior for the first time. I was pulling clothes off hangers and shoving them into a bag, and I stopped because of the way he was framing this. He wasn't saying what I did was wrong. He was saying reading what other people said made him look at himself, which meant all those times I said the exact same things to his face, it didn't count because it was just me. But strangers on the internet saying it, that got through to him. I told him that. I said so when I told you the same things for a year, it meant nothing but Reddit comments made you think. He didn't have an answer for that. He started going in a different direction, saying that the point was he was willing to work on it now. And didn't that matter? I asked him about the threat. Straight up. I said you told me you'd make sure everyone saw a side of me I don't want them to see. What did that mean? He immediately started trying to walk it back. He said he was angry, and he said things he didn't mean. I said that's not an answer, what did you mean? He said he just meant he could tell people about our problems too, that it goes both ways. that if I was going to put their relationship on blast, then he could do the same thing. I told him that's not what it sounded like, and he knew it. I told him it sounded like he was threatening to share intimate photos. His face changed, then said he would never do that. I said then, why phrase it that way? He said he was angry and it came out wrong. I said angry people say what they're actually thinking. They just say it louder. He started getting frustrated and said I was twisting his words, which was honestly hilarious coming from the king of twisting words. We went back and forth on this for a while, and I was not letting it go because this was the thing that had been eating at me since that night. Every time he tried to redirect the conversation, I pulled it back. He kept trying to make it about the Reddit post, about how I violated his trust, about how embarrassing it was to read strangers calling him controlling and abusive. I kept saying I don't care about your embarrassment right now. I care about the fact that you looked me in the face and made a threat, and I want to know exactly what you meant. He finally said something that I think was closer to the truth than anything else he'd said. He told me he said it because in that moment he wanted me to be as scared as he was. He said reading that post and those comments made him feel like he was losing control, and the threat was him trying to get it back. Which, okay, at least that was honest. But also, do you see what he just admitted to? He literally said the words losing control about our relationship. Not losing me, losing control. I pointed that out and he got flustered and said that wasn't what he meant. He meant he felt like the relationship was falling apart and he panicked. But he said what he said. You don't accidentally say losing control about a person you're supposed to be in a partnership with. I finished packing the bag. I had my documents, my clothes, a few other things. And then I told him something I'd been thinking about all week. I told him I wanted him to delete any intimate photos or videos he had of me. All of them. Everything from our entire relationship. He immediately said he didn't have anything like that. I said, Ray, we literally sent each other stuff during the first 6 months, don't play dumb. He got quiet for a second and then said he meant he didn't have them saved anywhere, that they were just in old text threads and he'd already lost them when he got a new phone last year. I asked him if they were backed up to his cloud. He said he didn't think so. I said, you don't think so or you know so. He said he'd check. I told him checking was not optional and I wasn't going to just trust his word on this. He was starting to get agitated, saying I was treating him like a criminal when he'd just tried to have an honest conversation with me. I told him he lost the right to be treated with blind trust when he factory reset my phone and made a veiled threat in the same night. That conversation ended with nothing actually resolved. He said he'd look through his cloud and his devices and delete anything. I said I wanted confirmation. He said I was being paranoid. I said you would be too if the roles were reversed and you know it. I left with my bag and drove back to my parents' house feeling like I'd accomplished exactly nothing except confirming that Ray was capable of telling me what I wanted to hear without actually giving me anything concrete. When I got back, my dad was home from work and sitting in the kitchen, and he could tell from my face that I'd seen Ray. He asked how it went, and I gave him the short version, that Ray acknowledged the phone thing was wrong and said he wanted to work on things. My dad just kind of looked at me and said, people who want to work on things don't destroy your property first. Which, yeah, fair point. That night, Zara came over to my parents' house because I needed to download everything that happened. We sat on the back porch even though it was freezing because I didn't want my parents hearing everything. I told Zara about the conversation and about Ray saying the threat was about being scared and wanting me to feel the same. Zara was not buying it. She said that's what people say when they realize how bad the thing they said sounds and they need to repackage it as something sympathetic. She asked if I believed him about the photos. I said I don't know. She said that's the problem. Zara brought up something else I hadn't thought about. She asked me who in Ray's life knew what was happening, because up to this point, everything had been between me and Ray and my family. She asked if Ray's friends knew we'd been fighting, if his family knew I'd moved out. And I realized I had no idea. Ray doesn't talk to his family much. His parents are divorced and his mom lives in Fargo and his dad is somewhere in Wisconsin and they're not close. He's got a couple friends from the hockey league, but I had no clue what he told them about any of this. That mattered because one of Ray's hockey friends is this guy, Patrick, who I actually get along with, okay. Patrick's girlfriend Kimberly and I had hung out a few times at group things. If Ray was telling Patrick and the rest of the guys some version of events where I was the crazy one who abandoned him over nothing, that was going to become a whole separate problem, especially because Patrick and Kimberly live in our building, 2 floors up. The next day, day 5 of staying at my parents', I was on the couch trying to restore more stuff to my phone when Andy came in from somewhere and dropped onto the other end of the couch and just said, "Hey, can I tell you something weird?" Andy told me that a couple weeks before the big fight, he'd been at our apartment playing games in the living room while Ray was in his office on a call. Andy said Ray's call went long and Andy needed to use the bathroom. The bathroom in our apartment is right next to Ray's office and the walls are paper thin. Andy said he could hear Ray talking and it wasn't a work call. He said Ray was talking to someone about me, specifically about how I'd been distant lately and hard to deal with, and how he didn't know what my problem was. Andy said the tone wasn't like someone venting to a friend, it was more like someone building a case, laying out a list of things I'd supposedly been doing wrong. I asked Andy who Ray was talking to. Andy said he didn't know, but the way Ray was talking, explaining who I was and what I did, it sounded like he was talking to someone who didn't know me. Not Patrick, not any of the hockey guys who've met me. Someone else. I asked Andy why he didn't tell me sooner. He said at the time he figured it was just Ray complaining to a friend, and everybody does that. But now with everything coming out, it felt different. It felt like Ray was telling someone a specific version of who I was before anything had even blown up between us. I sat with that for a while. Andy went back to his room and I just sat there turning it over. Ray had been talking to someone I'd never heard of about me in a way that sounded like he was setting up a narrative. And now I was thinking about his threat differently. Make sure everyone saw a side of me I don't want them to see. What if it wasn't about photos? What if he'd already been telling people things about me, creating a version of events where he was the reasonable one and I was the problem? What if the side of me he was going to show people was a complete fiction he'd already started building? This opened up a whole new box because suddenly, I wasn't just worried about intimate images. I was worried about my reputation with people I didn't even know about. And the thing about Ray is he's convincing. He could tell someone I was emotionally volatile or controlling or whatever, and deliver it with this calm, concerned voice. And people would believe him because he comes across as so reasonable. I decided I needed to go back to the apartment and have a real conversation about this. Not the surface level you said this and I said that back and forth. A real conversation where I pushed until I got actual answers, because I was done accepting vague reassurances and half-truths. 2 days later, day 7, I went back to the apartment again. Ray was home. The apartment was still weirdly clean. I sat down this time, at the kitchen table, because I wanted this to be a conversation and not me hovering near the door with a bag. I started by asking him who he'd been talking to on the phone a couple weeks before the fight. The call where he was discussing me and our relationship with someone I apparently didn't know. His face did something real quick, and then he asked what I was talking about. I told him Andy overheard part of the conversation through the wall. And Ray's response was to immediately go after Andy. He started talking about how Andy is always at the apartment and doesn't know how to mind his own business, and is Andy really the person I'm going to take information from? I told him I was not going to let him make this about Andy. I said, who were you talking to? He tried to dodge again, saying he talks to people about his life, and that's normal. I said, yeah, it's normal. So who was it? He finally said it was a guy he knew from an online group, some kind of men's advice thing. I asked what kind of men's advice group. He said it was nothing weird, just a forum where guys talk about relationship stuff. I asked why he would go to random guys on the internet to talk about me when he could talk to his actual friends. And he literally could not answer without seeing the irony, because that was exactly what I did. I went to the internet for advice about him. The difference was I did it anonymously and he was apparently giving out personal information about me to people in some men's group. I pointed that out. I said you screamed at me for posting anonymously on Reddit and you're in some group talking about me with people who might know details about my actual life. He said it wasn't the same thing because he didn't share my name or anything identifying. I said neither did I. He said but my post could have gotten back to people who know us. I said how? I used a throwaway. No names, no location, no details. He had nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because the thing he punished me for was the exact thing he was doing, except he was doing it with less anonymity. That fight escalated into something bigger because once I started pulling on that thread, more stuff came out. He admitted he'd been in this online group for about 4 months. He said it started after we had a fight about me spending too much time at my parents' house, and he wanted perspective. I asked him what he told these people about me. He said he just described situations. I asked him to be specific. He said things like me being too close with my family and not making enough effort in the relationship and being emotionally withdrawn. I said emotionally withdrawn. He said, yeah, that sometimes I seemed like I didn't care and I was just going through the motions. And I looked at him across that kitchen table and I said, Ray, do you understand that the reason I seemed withdrawn is because I was walking on eggshells for a year trying not to set you off? Do you get that? The thing you complained about to strangers was the direct result of your own behavior. Then I asked the question that I'd been circling. I asked if he'd shared any photos of me in this group. He said no immediately, almost too fast. I said I needed him to show me the group. He said absolutely not. It was his private space the same way Reddit was mine. I said it's not the same because I didn't share identifying information about you and I don't know what you shared about me. He refused. He said if I didn't trust him, then maybe that was the real problem. I was so frustrated, I literally had to get up and walk to the bathroom just to take a breath. When I came back, I told him that trust was something he shattered when he wiped my phone, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. The conversation went on for almost 2 hours. It kept circling, and every time I pinned him on something, he'd shift to something else. When I brought up the online group, he'd go back to my Reddit post. When I brought up the threat, he'd bring up how hurt he was reading those comments. When I asked about photos, he'd talk about trust. It was exhausting, and I think that's partially the point. Exhaust me enough, and I stop asking questions. But I didn't stop. I kept coming back to the same things. And near the end of the conversation, when he could tell I wasn't going to just agree to come home and move on, something shifted. He got real still and looked at me and said if I walked out that door and ended things, he was going to tell people his version of what happened. And his version was that I was unstable and that I'd been spiraling for months, and that the Reddit post was proof I was obsessed with finding problems that didn't exist. I told him that proved everything. I said, "You're literally doing right now the thing you threatened to do, constructing a fake version of me to punish me for not doing what you want." He said it wasn't fake. He said he genuinely believed I'd been struggling with anxiety and making things up. I said the Reddit post had 800 comments from strangers who read my description and all came to the same conclusion, and maybe the problem wasn't my perception of reality. He got really frustrated at that point and told me to leave if I was going to leave. I said I was going to leave, and I was also going to figure out the lease situation because I couldn't live with someone who monitors my communications and threatens me when I try to get help. He called after me as I was walking out that I was making a mistake, and I'd regret this when I calmed down. I drove back to my parents' house shaking, from anger, from 2 hours of having every sentence I said deflected and twisted and thrown back, from realizing that this man had been building a narrative about me to strangers for months while punishing me for doing the same thing anonymously, from knowing that he was going to start telling people I was mentally unwell as his cover story. When I got home, my dad was in the garage and he took one look at me getting out of my car and asked what happened. I told him about the online group. I told him Ray had been talking about me to strangers for months. My dad's face went a specific kind of dark and he said, "So he's allowed to talk about you, but you're not allowed to talk about him, and that's the rule." "Yeah, Dad. That's the rule, apparently." I went inside and my mom was cooking dinner and she asked how it went, and I started telling her and I couldn't hold back anymore. I told her about the threat. All of it. What he said that night. What I was afraid it meant. Everything. My mom stopped what she was doing and just stood there for a second. Then she called my dad in from the garage. And my dad came in and my mom told him what Ray had said, and I watched my dad go through about 6 emotions in 3 seconds. He started toward the door. Literally started walking toward the front door. My mom grabbed his arm and said, "Not right now," and they had this intense 30-second exchange where my dad was saying he was going to that apartment, and my mom was saying that wasn't going to help anything. My dad eventually sat down at the table, but he was vibrating. He said, "This isn't a relationship problem anymore. This is someone threatening you." He asked me if I wanted to file a police report. I said, "For what?" He didn't specifically say photos. He could have meant anything. My dad said the threat itself was enough. My mom disagreed. She said without specifics, the police wouldn't do anything and going to them might escalate Ray's behavior. They started arguing about it across the table while I sat between them. My parents eventually stopped arguing and agreed that the immediate priority was getting me off the lease and getting my remaining things out of the apartment. My dad volunteered to go with me. My mom said maybe just me and her should go and dad should stay home. That started another whole argument about whether my dad being there would make things better or worse. I went to bed that night on the couch with my family knowing everything, and my dad barely containing himself and Andy sitting on something he wouldn't tell me yet, and Ray probably in the apartment crafting whatever version of reality he was going to present to whoever would listen. I'll update with the rest because this is already way too long. And honestly, the thing Andy told me the next morning is a whole situation on its own. Oh, so when she posts anonymously on Reddit with no names and no details, she gets her phone factory reset, but when he joins a whole men's group and talks about her for 4 months, that's just him getting perspective. Got it. Cool. Love the rules. Love how they only apply in one direction. Love how he screamed at her for going to strangers on the internet and then was literally in a group chat with strangers on the internet doing the same thing. The hypocrisy is so loud it needs its own zip code. And losing control just fell out of his mouth like that, huh? Not losing her, not losing the relationship, not losing love, losing control. And he tried to walk it back, but the thing about the truth is it doesn't need an invitation, it just shows up and sits down. You can try to rephrase it and repackage it and put a bow on it. But we all heard what you said, dude, and you can't unring that bell. Some men will tell you exactly who they are in the middle of a sentence, and then spend the next hour trying to convince you they didn't say it. But they said it. They always said it. Final update. Okay, last one. I promise. And honestly, this update is the wildest one because everything kind of exploded at the same time and I'm still sorting through the aftermath, but I think I owe you guys the full picture since you've been here for all of it. So I left off with Andy saying he had something to tell me. The next morning I was up early, couldn't sleep again, and Andy was already in the kitchen, which should tell you how serious this was, because Andy before noon is like a solar eclipse. It happens, but it's rare. He sat down across from me and told me that about a week before the big fight he'd been at our apartment. He was in the living room playing on Ray's PlayStation, and Ray was in his office with the door mostly shut but not latched. Andy said he got up to use the bathroom, and when he passed Ray's office, he could hear Ray on Discord, like clearly on a voice call with other guys. Andy said he wouldn't have thought anything of it except he heard my name. Andy stopped in the hallway and listened for maybe a minute. He said Ray was talking to at least 2 or 3 other guys, and the way they were going back and forth, it sounded like a group Ray was comfortable with, not strangers. And what Ray was saying about me was not venting. It wasn't, oh, my girlfriend is being annoying, or we had a fight. Andy said Ray was calling me stupid. Specifically said I was dumb and couldn't figure out basic things on my own. He said Ray told these guys I was basically useless, that I couldn't cook, couldn't manage money, couldn't hold a conversation about anything that mattered. He said Ray told them he needed to get rid of me, but he didn't have anywhere to go yet because the apartment was convenient and the rent split made it affordable, and he wasn't going to blow that up until he had a plan. Andy said the other guys on the call were laughing. One of them apparently said something like, just ghost her, and Ray said he couldn't because I'd go crying to my family and make it a whole thing. Another one said something Andy couldn't hear clearly, and Ray laughed and said she thinks we're gonna get married, which is honestly sad. Andy told me he stood in that hallway for about a minute and then went back to the living room and put his headphones on and didn't say anything. I asked him why. He said because he didn't know what to do with it. He said part of him thought maybe Ray was just talking trash the way guys sometimes do, and he didn't want to blow up my relationship over something that might have been exaggerated, bro. Talk. But then the fight happened, and the phone thing happened, and the threat happened, and Andy said he couldn't sit on it anymore. I just sat at that kitchen table looking at my little brother, and I could tell this had been eating at him. He kept apologizing for not telling me sooner. I told him to stop because he was 22, and it wasn't his job to manage my relationship, and honestly, what would I have done if he'd told me before the fight? Probably confronted Ray. Ray would have denied it. I would have ended up being the paranoid girlfriend going through his Discord, and the whole thing would have been turned around on me the way everything always got turned around. But hearing it now, after everything else, it was like the last piece falling into a picture I'd been staring at for weeks. He was staying because it was convenient. The rent, the apartment, the comfort of having someone handle the domestic stuff while he sat in his office talking to his little internet friends about how pathetic I was. Every time he criticized my friends or my family or how I spent money, it wasn't because he cared about our relationship improving. It was because I was an inconvenience he was managing until he had something better lined up. The thought of how many nights I'd laid in bed next to this man worrying about whether I was being a good enough girlfriend while he was literally on Discord calling me stupid made me want to scream. I did not go to the apartment that day. I needed to sit with this. But apparently, my dad did not need to sit with anything. So here's what happened, and I didn't find out about this until hours later. After I told my parents about the threat the night before, my dad had been barely holding it together. My mom had managed to keep him from going over there that night. But apparently the next morning while I was in the kitchen with Andy, my dad told my mom he was going to the hardware store. He did not go to the hardware store. My dad drove to the apartment. Ray opened the door and my dad walked in. I don't have the full details of the conversation because my dad is not a man who gives play-by-plays, but what I pieced together from my dad and later from Ray's texts is this. My dad told Ray he knew about the threat. He said he knew Ray had threatened his daughter with something and he wanted Ray to understand very clearly what that meant from where my dad was standing. Ray apparently started with the, it was a misunderstanding line and my dad was not having it. Ray then apparently made the mistake of saying something along the lines of, maybe your daughter shouldn't have put their business on the internet if she didn't want consequences. My dad hit him, straight up, right in the face. And from what I gathered, it was one hit and Ray went down and my dad stood there and told him that if a single photo or video or anything involving me surfaced anywhere, he would come back and they'd have a much longer conversation. Then my dad left. I found out because Ray sent me a string of texts around 1 p.m. He was furious. He said my dad assaulted him and he was going to press charges and my entire family was insane. He sent a photo of himself with a swollen eye that was already going purple. He said this proved everything he'd been saying about me and my family, that we were all unhinged and violent, and he was going to make sure everyone knew it. I went to my dad who was in the garage and I asked him if he went to the apartment. He didn't even deny it. He just looked at me and said, nobody threatens my kid. My mom was furious. She started going off about how he just gave Ray exactly what he wanted. A reason to play victim, potential assault charges, proof that our family was the problem. My dad said he didn't care. My mom said, well, you're going to care when he calls the police. My dad said, let him call. This turned into the biggest fight my parents have had in years. My mom was yelling that dad made everything worse, that now Ray had ammunition, that she'd specifically told him not to go over there. My dad was yelling back that his daughter was being threatened, and no man alive was going to do that, and expect him to sit at home. Andy and I were in the living room listening to them go at it in the kitchen, and Andy just looked at me and said, well, this is fun. I texted Ray back. I told him that I did not send my dad, and I did not know he was going to do that. But I also told him that threatening someone's daughter and being surprised when her father shows up is a special kind of stupid. He sent back a bunch of messages about lawyers and charges and how I was going to regret all of this. I told him to go ahead and file charges, and while he was at the police station, he could explain why he factory reset my phone and threatened to distribute intimate images. I told him to really think about how that conversation would go for him. He didn't respond to that one. The next few days were chaos. My mom wasn't speaking to my dad. My dad was acting like nothing happened. Ray was sending me walls of text alternating between threatening legal action and asking if we could work things out, which was honestly the most Ray thing possible. One message, it's "I'm pressing charges," and the next, it's "I still think we can fix this." Like, sir, what? I went back to the apartment with my mom to get the rest of my stuff. Ray was there, and the bruise on his eye was deep purple and yellow at the edges. He tried to talk to my mom, started in about how my dad had no right, and he just wanted to have a reasonable conversation. My mom told him that reasonable people don't factory reset their girlfriend's phone, and he should be grateful it was just one hit because she had to physically hold my dad back from coming here every day this week. Ray stood in the hallway watching us carry out boxes, and every trip past him, I could see him trying to figure out how to regain some footing in this situation, and failing. The lease situation took some back and forth, but I'm off it. My landlord was actually helpful once I explained the situation without going into all the details. Just said the relationship ended and I needed off. Ray never filed charges against my dad. I think Zara was right when she said he wouldn't, because opening that door meant explaining the full context, and Ray didn't want anyone in authority hearing my side of the story. The threat about photos was enough to make him think twice about involving police. He's texted me a few more times since. The last one was 3 days ago, saying he hoped I was happy destroying something that could have been great. I didn't respond. There's nothing left to say to someone who thinks calling you stupid and useless behind your back while eating the dinner you cooked is something that could have been great. I'm still at my parents'. My mom and dad are talking again, mostly, though my mom still brings up the apartment visit when she's annoyed about anything. The photos thing still hangs over me. I don't know if he actually has anything saved. I don't know what he told his Discord group. I filed a report with the police about the threat, so there's a paper trail if anything ever surfaces. Zara keeps telling me North Dakota law is clear on this and he'd be an idiot to try anything. I believe her, but the not knowing still sits in the back of my head. Oh, and yeah, I made a new Reddit account because Ray wanted me to believe that speaking up about what was happening to me was the problem, and every single person who commented on my original post proved that it wasn't. So here I am, still posting, still talking. If you read all 3 parts of this, you deserve a medal and a nap, and I hope your week is better than mine has been. Truly. Some men don't stay because they love you, they stay because your half of the rent is keeping their life affordable. That's it. That's the whole love story. You are not a girlfriend, you are a financial arrangement with feelings, and the feelings are getting in the way of an otherwise very convenient setup. And the wildest part is you'll never know, because these men will kiss you goodnight and let you cook them dinner and accept every single thing you do for them, while privately counting down the days until they can leave without it costing them anything. And I just need to say that dads who pretend they're going to the hardware store when they are absolutely not going to the hardware store are my favorite category of human being on this planet. Is it legally advisable? No. Would every lawyer in America say don't do that? 100%. But is there something deeply beautiful about a man who hears his daughter was threatened and simply cannot physically remain in a chair? Yes. Sometimes love doesn't look like good advice. Sometimes love looks like a man lying to his wife about where he's going because his whole body decided this was happening before his brain could catch up. His wife is right that it was dumb. His wife is also married to a man who would walk through a wall for his kid, and that's not nothing.